It's amazing to me to project into the future the fundamental role of banking, right? I mean, you raise some very provocative questions that make people think about the future of the entire industry. 非常荣幸有这个机会哈，跟Emmanuel Daniel 来讨论一下他新出的这本书哈。这本书我先做一个简单的介绍。这本书是最近有中文版哈，有中文版 Chinese version。Mandarin translation 好像外面有可以卖了，签个字啊，签个字。这本书我觉得我昨天晚上刚through一下哈，我觉得我有很大的这个感受。就这本书是关于什么的？这本书是关于这个 banking industry 的未来啊。这个现在这个时代，我觉得对银行、对整个金融机构，在未来一个技术非常快速发展哈，在AI 的时代，在 blockchain 的时代，到底这个银行作用是什么？会不会这个银行的这个 fundamentally 基本就根本上来说，银行还会不会像以前一样，这个在经济生活中这么重要的这个作用嘛？哈，这是一个很 fundamental 的 question， 所以我们今天很有机会，来一起探讨一下这本书。So with that said, I'm going to turn to Emmanuel about this book. I have a couple of questions, Emmanuel. First of all, it's amazing to me to project into the future the fundamental role of banking, right? I mean, you raise some very provocative questions that make people think about the future of the entire industry. So can you share with us, the context in which you actually thought about writing this book? What's driving your interest in writing a book, something like this, that, not all essentially you're issuing some warnings to the industry. For those people, executives in the banking industry, have to be really thinking hard about the future. A future that may put their entire industry in peril, actually, right, if they're not responding to this. So, so my question is, what is actually driving you to say something that probably not all the gospels to the banking industry?
Thank you, John, and really happy to do this session with you. Because you are a strategist yourself. I am the founder of the Asian Banker. I founded it in 1996, so it's nearly 28 years or so of building this understanding of the banking industry from an operational point of view on a global basis, not just in Asia, in the Middle East, Africa, in the US, and so on. In fact, the person who wrote the foreword to the book, there are two forewords. One is Barney Frank, the congressman who co-authored the Dodd-Frank Act, and he's a very dear friend. And Barney is as mainstream as you can imagine a congressman to be in the understanding of what the banking industry should be. And he read my book and then wrote the foreword and was very polite, and he pointed out a couple of areas where he disagreed with me on intermediation and so on. And then after he retired, he worked he was invited to be a director of Signature Bank in New York. And as it turned out, Signature Bank, together with Silicon Valley Bank, were one of the first victims of digitization and the crypto industry. So it's very interesting that many things that I'm saying in the book are becoming real for the very people with whom I work with in the industry. So the first thing I say in the book is that the intermediation business is coming to an end. The technology that exists for the intermediation business already exists. When we take into account technologies like cryptocurrencies, it doesn't matter whether you believe in cryptos, whether you invest in cryptos, but the technology and the blockchain technology that supports it now enables you and I as end users in finance to interact with each other without a bank in the story. So the banking industry has to reinvent itself to continue having that relevance and that role as an intermediary between two people. And that's why on the cover of the book, I have a picture of eyes. In order to explain the complexity of what we mean by the personalization of finances here, which is what the title of the book is, ice was something that was sawn out of the lakes and then put on horse-drawn carriages and taken to wherever you need to use them. And today, where do we get ice? In the refrigerator, when we want them and how we want to use them. And that's what's going to happen in finance. When we think of the money that we carry, and today in China, all of us carry digital money, that money is subject to inflation, exchange rates, bank fees, uncertainties, and all of that. It's not within our control. And here you have a technology that's making money itself well within our control. The interesting thing is that as I was thinking through the implications of that and the process by which the industry, wraps its ability around these changes taking place in technology, I then started thinking a lot about how countries themselves will change and evolve. And these technologies will affect all countries regardless of whatever label you have, whether they're capitalist or socialist, it doesn't matter. And then I also realized that if money can be personalized, then social life will be personalized, and it's going to have a profound effect on the way we live our life. And for that reason, how governments think about about regulating and helping society to hold together also has a profound effect. So I started writing this book about banking, but I ended up writing about the future of humanity as a whole.
Yeah. As I read this, you're actually a very good writer. So it's a joy to read these things and somewhat philosophical things you actually mentioned, right? So it's a very good read. Other than the perilous role of mediation, as we alluded to just a minute ago, of the entire banking industry, you mentioned a couple of other things. For example, the title of the book, Personalization, right? You also talk about CFC example in the book, for example, right? You also, talk about the device independence in the future for banking services, right? Or you also talk about, the onslaught of these big platforms, not from the financial sector, but from other areas. And they're effectively big banks these days, right? So tell us a little bit more about, just summarize a few points that you think represents the future of the banking industry, the most important things that our banking executives here would like to learn, let's say 5, 10, 20 years away from now. How would the banking industry look like, in the future? Prophesize for us.
Yes. So I say in the book, I actually spend a whole section recounting the story of how WeChat and Alipay became ubiquitous in China. And this was, from the year 2010. When we think about the original platforms, Facebook or Google and so on, they were created, in the 1990s, in the case of Facebook, 2007, and they were native to desktop technology. But when Alipay and WeChat Pay came on stream, they went directly into mobile technology, and so I say that they are mobile native, and that is why China was able to embrace mobile technology and run with it and define it and ace it because mobile was the DNA in the Chinese economy from about 2010 onwards. Now, what I'm saying in the book is that realm is also now transitioning into something else, and we cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot be proud of the fact that China has achieved amazing capabilities on digital banking, for example. Now, what's going to happen is mobile is going to give way to device independence. The technology is now going to sit on devices all around us, on the drone device, on our doors, in our refrigerators, on our television screens, wherever, in our cars. The BYD car is a moving mobile device. And so when that happens, the power is taken away from the mobile and make it more ubiquitous. And so the players who are dominant in mobile today, they need to transform themselves to become device independent. and there are new players coming on stream. So even as we think about TikTok and Douyin and how it's aced the algorithm war and has become a global player, there are new players coming on stream. Kuaishou and other players who are taking that revolution to a new realm and putting algorithms into all kinds of different devices. So it's a moving target, and the winners of today have to reinvent themselves for new business models that will evolve over time.
Yeah, so you describe a quite challenging world for the entire financial community. So in terms of the response by the industry, what would your recommendations? In other words, we have a lot of executives from big banks here in China. I guess, the future you are describing is it's full of challenges, but I'm pretty sure also opportunities as well, right? So how would the traditional commercial bank respond to all this technology?
This is a wonderful.
What would be your recommendations to the executives?
So when the Chinese publication, the Chinese version was going to be published, I approached someone who is a very dear friend and whom I've known during the time that he took his bank into an amazing phase of leadership, Mr. Zhang, the chairman of ICBC, and he was the chairman, and we met in about 2001 when ICBC was still transforming its back end. It was still a legacy institution. And then he had to prepare the institution both on the balance sheet as well as operationally for the IPO in 2004. And he himself had written about this story, about the glorious years in which China's big four banks had transformed into modern, amazing, well-run institutions, which is what they are today. And he wrote the foreword to my Chinese edition. So I'm very pleased and grateful that someone I totally respect, wrote the foreword for the Chinese edition. But then after that, we discussed, so what should an ICBC focus on going forward? There's lots happening. A bank like ICBC, which has about 700 million customers, is a natural platform for the use of AI to understand its customer base, transform its relationships, and so on. And so what I say in my book are a few catchphrases. One of the catchphrases is that if the product doesn't change, nothing changed. And what I mean by that is that if banks continue to sell products as they know them to be today, say mortgages, for example. So a customer comes in and you, based on your interest rates and your risk profile, you make a mortgage available to that person, and that mortgage is something that will occupy that person's asset base for maybe 20 years or so. Imagine what mortgages will look like when you digitize it. When you digitize it means that the fulfillment process can be in minutes rather than 3 months. That the next gen, a Gen Z or a Gen A that is coming on stream now, will treat mortgages like a discretionary asset. They can buy and sell a property sitting on your bed one day. And so banks need to start thinking what mortgages will look like. They can look like time-based investments, or something that can be flipped very quickly, and so on. And in that way, credit cards are already changing. Very few of us even carry a physical card today. And if data on finance is also device independent, that's going to change the way in which we view our credit relationships and all of that. A lot of the work is already underway in China. And institutions like WeBank are using new sets of information to create a credit profile of the user. But then a lot more developments are going to take place in the future.
Yeah, so this goes back to the one of the most difficult problems residing with the bank as I know it. That has to do with the high cost of serving small, medium-sized businesses, microfinances. Usually, typically, in the past, banks hate it because the cost of serving these customers are usually very high. But here in China, we have this concept called inclusive financing. We have to, as a government, as an authority, as a policy initiative, we have to, really cater to their market and this sort of this political agenda here that this segment of markets cannot be just to pick and choose. You have to attend to this market. And I guess, the idea of really personalized finance, personalized lending, for example, and the idea you talk about, do some due diligence within a click of a second, or I can do this very quickly, can probably fundamentally, change the way the banks are being run, I guess, right?
Yeah, and the whole idea there is very simple, that you need to be where the customer is, not the customer be where the bank is.
Yeah.
So, we should just completely remove this idea that banking is something that the customer does by going to somewhere or calling somebody. It's the other way around. The bank or the idea of financial intermediation should be where the need is. And already we see this in China, where a number of leading platforms are now global leaders in supply chain technologies, through social commerce, being able to do a fulfillment, of a podcaster, running around in a department store in New York, and doing that completion of the transaction online. So the bank wants to be where the customer is, not ask the customer to go somewhere the institution is. Yeah. I was going to mention that, in the conversation that we had just before this, we had two eminent economists talking about, how we evaluate the economy. And something I mentioned in my book is that the Bureau for Economic Analysis in the US has already started in about 2013 to reconfigure what we mean by GDP. They've started to put in new elements that are digital, that are about creative industries, that are about virtual industries, and that are about ephemeral industries. And they are starting to factor into what comprises the GDP. So, even as the previous speaker, Steve, put out a chart and said, this is where China's GDP is, and this is where the US GDP is. The way in which GDP itself is going to be measured in the future will involve a lot more, digital elements in there. And I say in my book that anything that can be digitized can be financialized.
Right.
And if data can be digitalized, you can be sure that in the future that all markets and all creators of data will be looking for opportunities to financialize all kinds of data. In fact, that was the discussion in Shanghai just this week, which is how do we create more markets? How do we create secondary markets? How do we create derivative markets? And on the markets front, the world has been in the business of trying to create new markets around all kinds of different assets. Like in fruits, for example, kiwi has a market, kiwi fruits, because kiwi is a lot more enduring and less perishable than papaya, for example, right? So in the same way, different data will be tested for how it's going to be market friendly in that way. And as the world digitizes and creates new forms of asset classes, that's exactly where you're going to find new product base that you never imagined before. Right. And the second person who wrote a foreword to my book was Richard Sandler, who was the creator of interest rate derivatives markets and the climate bond market in the US, the cap and trade market. Now, when you digitize that information, you're actually creating new markets that makes it possible to fund a lot of the climate agendas that we are now getting into.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As economists, I understand that the value added, which is GDP, right, created by things not related to physical products, not related to something mined from Earth, for example, has been really increasing in the economy in the last few decades. But having said that, we still have this. I still have this thought about trying to strike a balance here. In China, in the banking industry and the financial industry, we have this mandate that the financial industry is for the real economy. Real economy, right? So, China's a very manufacturing intensive economy. We have a huge, over about 50% of the GDP is still related to making things that can be touched. So how do you look at that issue? What is the role of finance and banking in the future in terms of, at the one side, we understand that it's catering towards economy that's rapidly moving to the direction of more virtual side of the economy is growing. On the other hand, it's still very much a manufacturing economy. We still have a notion called a real economy. And how do you strike a balance here?
John, I think about that very deeply.
Mm-hmm.
For 2,000 years, China has been a manufacturing economy. In Singapore and the Civilization Museum, there is a very nice exhibition of a wreck of a ship that sank in Southeast Asia that was filled with 70,000 pieces of ceramics. And this was, from that period, I think it was the Tang Dynasty period. And then there are other wrecks into the Ming Dynasty and so on. And so China has this incredible ability to manufacture.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes through its own phases, like what the US is accusing China of, overproduction and overcapacity and all that. It has its own mechanism of dealing with it. Because sure, when a certain asset class becomes popular, everybody gets into that business, and then they start destroying out each other and so on. And China is trying to build the services element of its economy so that it's more broad-based and sustainable, and so services is an important pillar of the economy. And to the extent that it can be digitized, it will become a new phase of the real economy in that regard. So it's a changing phase of a civilization. It's not just a current economy in that way. And how China makes that transition, some of it will be based on the strengths of Chinese civilization. And Chinese civilization will probably need to look for other complementary civilizations that it can work with, which it actually already has with the US today. The US invents, China produces. And it works very well if you take the geopolitics out of it. So I think that, and that's not just for China. Every country, every civilization around the world will have to look for those complementary facets that makes it sustainable.
Yeah. You sound more like a philosopher than a banker. You're more of a philosopher than a banker, I guess. Okay, so yeah. Anyway, so we have 1 more minute left. I will just allow one question maybe raised from the audience. Anybody has any question for Emmanuel? I think this. All right. So if no more questions, I will take the time to advertise again this book. There's a stand outside that you can buy. It's a Chinese version. It's a great book. I strongly recommend. It's not cost a lot of money, and on top of this, you get a signature from Emmanuel. So don't miss that opportunity. Take the time during the break to go and buy a copy for this book.
I just want to say, I want to thank CITIC Press for having supported this book. I know that that the current topics that are being discussed, that are hot topics in China today and in the industry as a whole, may seem like that this book is a little bit more into the future. But if we get the first principles right, we can navigate our way into the future. And that's what this book is about. So thank you very much.
So with that note, we're going to stop here. Thank you very much for attending to this panel. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.